to Jonathan Taylor. Huge hole. He's at the 30. He's going to go. 10, 5, touchdown. Jonathan Taylor made a man miss the line of scrimmage and then runs it into Pater for a one-handed INT. Are you kidding me? Kenny Moore.
What a play by Nyheim Hines.
Horseshoe is back, baby. The horseshoe is back.
What is going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of the Bring the Juice Colts podcast. Cody Felger here. Mr. Stephen Burton from the No Horsing Around Colts podcast here with me as well. Stephen, how you doing, man?
I'm good, man. It's always fun to jump in here with you.
It is, man. And what better topic than looking at probably the most interesting position on this team, just all the players considered. There's a lot of different players. The defensive line, man. I mean, it's crazy to look at this position group and just look at the sheer talent that the Colts have acquired via free agency, via trades, via the draft. There's so much that the Colts have done, especially over the last couple of years, to really revamp this unit. And I'm really excited to kind of jump in and look at this unit. You know, a combination of proven guys, a combination of that, and also some unproven, you know, whether they're rookie, second, third-year players, some guys who have a lot of high ceilings, we feel like. And so it's going to be a lot of fun, man, looking at this group. Let's start here, Stephen, we'll start at the defensive ends because there's a lot to talk about at defensive end. I'll just start naming a couple guys here, man, because there's going to be a lot of competition, especially at one defensive end spot. You know, there's guys like Tyquan Lewis. There's guys like Kamoko Toure. There's guys like Al-Qadim Muhammad, who the Colts brought back. Guys like Ben Banogu, guys like Isaac Rochelle, who they signed in the offseason. There's going to be a lot of guys potentially vying for one of these defensive end spots. What is your overall thoughts on this defensive end group, and especially obviously Kwity Paye, who the Colts drafted in the first round this year? What are your thoughts overall on this unit? Because there's a lot of talent here and a lot of unique skill sets in this defensive end room.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. It seems to be a lot of there's a lot of unproven talent too, talent that we believe in as fans that you think Ballard believes in. I'm really high on Kamoko Toure because he wasn't healthy last year. He was never really fully healthy. I'm interested to see how he plays this upcoming season. You know, and obviously what you brought up too with Kwity. Kwitty's kind of, it seems from all signs that I've seen, that I know you've seen too, that he's pretty much locked down one of the positions. So it's who's going to be at the other one.
Right.
I mean, it's funny you bring up Ben Banogu. That seems to be like the dirty word now a little bit in Colts Twitter and in Colts just fandom. My co-host Zach has actually gone out on the limb and said he does not think he will be on the team when the ball kicks off for the regular season. It was super interesting for me. You know, Zach Kiefer did, when he had his media availability, Banogu was extremely defensive too on his play from last year, not really looking to improve because a lot of people were trying to make that connection with Tyquan. But Tyquan was he owned all his mistakes the previous year and wanted to grow from them. Right. I mean, it's really deep. It's funny when you talk to non-Colts fans, there's a lot of unknown. They don't know who these players are. They know who Kwity Paye is. That's about it. They don't know who these other players are, which is funny to me. Living in Tennessee for the last several years, you heard a ton about no one knew who Danico Autry was, you know, and then he signs with the Titans. It's like, he's amazing, but no one knew who he was when he was with the Colts, and no one thought that he was any good outside of the Colts organization. So I feel like it's the same. There's a lot of unproven talent that's sitting there, and it's really going to be interesting to see how they organize snap counts. How much playing time are you going to get? I mean, they're going to give Kwity every opportunity to lock down the spot that he's in, and then you've got the other one. How much are you going to be rotating out these players? Who's going to develop? Who's going to make the jump? I mean, we've said it on our show that between Ben Banogu and Kamoko Toure, they're two of the main people who are kind of put up or shut up this season. And so you really have to hope that they develop. If they develop, man, I mean, just another notch on the board for Ballard with his ability to pick these players. And it almost seems too that this season more than any, that Ballard's betting on that. He didn't really go out and sign any players like everyone wanted. And it was almost seemed like he was saying, no, I want my young guys to play. Put them in and let's see what they can do.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm really interested to see. Like I said, I'm really high on Kamoko Toure because I've seen him flash. We're not that on our show, we're not that high on Ben Bandigood because I've not seen it at all, and it doesn't seem like I've seen a desire. So, I mean, that's kind of where I sit. It's kind of long-winded, but there's a lot of players to cover.
There are so many players to cover. You're right. I kind of take going back to the Ben Bandigood comment just for a minute here. I kind of took it as just like he's putting it behind him and going towards, but I see how people look at it, how it comes across for sure. But I'm excited because I feel like he's just put his head down. He hasn't really said a whole lot, and he's just really been working from what it seems like. So obviously it'll tell this season if he kind of responds like a Tyquan Lewis did this last season when we said, is he going to make the roster? And he goes and has a phenomenal training camp. We don't know right now, but I definitely think it's a possibility, and we know the talent's there. I mean, even a couple of years ago, I know he hasn't flashed as much as, say, a Toure has, but you look even a couple of years ago, that Denver game, Ben Bandigood comes off the edge, strip sacks Joe Flacco, Colts win the game. So he's had a few moments, not as many as Toure, but he's had a few moments where you're like, okay, I see why the Colts took him that early that they did. But, man, the Colts have invested so much into this defensive end room in terms of draft capital. I mean, you look at all the now Kwity Paye first-round pick, all the second-round picks the Colts have invested in. There's a lot of high-end investment in this defensive end room, which I think is interesting because the talent is there unquestionably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's kind of funny that you say that too, because it's like the looking in the mirror a little bit with it. It's the D end room on that side of the ball is exactly the same as the wide receiver room on the other side of the ball. We've invested a lot of capital, a lot of draft picks, a lot of those second round picks, not really first like with this one, but they've invested a ton of time. It's interesting when you were talking with Ben Bandigood too, is that they do seem high on him. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Cody, but I feel as if didn't Ballard even talk about he was just freak athlete that they even considered putting at linebacker at one point,
yes,
just to get him on the field. So, I mean, I love Zach. We butted heads on the take that he had about it. I wasn't sure because Ballard's once he's done with the player, once he knows that player is not going to contribute, he's not afraid to cut bait.
Yep.
I think he wants to give him. There's several players on the team. I think he wants to give them all one more chance to see what they can do, and he's still really young. So I mean, just imagine if him and Kamoko and Tyquan improves. I mean, it's going to be a scary line.
Mm-hmm. And the crazy thing is, you really need only one of those guys to just flash, and really consistently flash and be a stud. And if you have that, I mean, we already talked about Kwity Paye and how we feel like he's going to be a really good player. But if you have one of these other guys who hasn't lived up to that potential yet, if they flash, I mean, this defensive end room could quickly go from a glaring weakness to a big strength, and that's for sure. And, and it's interesting because I thought about that, especially when the Colts drafted Dayo Odengbo, right, in that second round. And all speculation was not going to be ready for the regular season, may not even be ready for the 2020 season or 2021 season, excuse me. But, it's a future investment. And I think it's great because you're good either way, I feel like. Like if, say, one of those guys or multiple of those guys flash this year and they turn out to be really, they turn out to be studs, basically, good, you're great. You're set at defensive end for a long time. You don't have to worry about it. Dio can play basically anywhere, but if none of these guys live up to that potential, I mean, you got Dio waiting in the wings, man, maybe even later on this season, potentially to come and steal the other defensive end spot. So it's very interesting to me. The Colts elected to go that route to kind of stop going from potential to actually making it reality, right? With how good they want their defensive ends to be.
Yeah, and everything I've heard, talking specifically about Dio is, we had George Brimmer on a few weeks ago, and he was like, man, he's the largest human being I've seen in a long time. He was like, he's just massive, and they love him. They love him, and I'm really interested to see kind of the correlation between when he comes back and when Fisher comes back, because they both tore their Achilles on the same exact day. So what does that look like? I've kind of felt all along that I think Dio misses about half the season, maybe 8 to 10 games, somewhere around there. But man, I mean, if you're right, if Kamoko pops or Banagoo pops, and then you integrate the other one, I mean, the defense is already really scary and really good. And you add a pass rusher to it. Oh my God. Like, you don't know teams won't know what to defend. You've got Buckner in the middle, what do you do with him? He's an all-pro. And now you finally have some people coming off the edge. I mean, it's going to be a scary thing, and it just helps the entire team. It helps kind of what I think is probably the weakest spot, which is the corners. It'll help that. So, I mean, it's really interesting. It's going to be a really interesting thing to see. And as me and you were talking off air a little bit about training camp, as we get closer to that, what is that going to? This is going to be like a huge battle for this other end position. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch and see who kind of comes out of it.
Yeah. Oh, it's going to be, honestly, probably the biggest thing to watch in training camp. That's for sure. Who takes it? Who finally emerges and just takes it? Does anybody do that? It's like, it's going to be so interesting to watch the other defensive end position because there's so many guys vying for it. And there's so much talent that you invested into that, like I mentioned. And I feel like the guy right now if you ask me right now, who do I think is going to take it? I think a guy like Tyquan Lewis has a really good chance to do that. He's not necessarily the type of pass rusher like, say a Kamoko Toure or even a Ben Banagoo. He's not that type of rusher, but overall he's a very solid player. I feel like, he does a lot of things really well, and he had a very, very good 2020 season. He even started some games for the Colts in 2020. So I think he's potentially a guy that can even take his game to another level at defensive end. I'm really excited to see kind of what he brings.
Yeah, and it's a great point too. He's steady. You can rely on him. He's trustworthy, and he knows his job. So I think that's a great point you make too. I think I could very easily see him coming out of training camp as the starter at the beginning of the year. And then, as players develop, as some of these players get better, maybe they do pass him and they get in the position. But I'd be perfectly fine with him playing as long as he's playing at the level he played last year, not 2 years ago.
Right.
As long as he continues to kind of come along, I'm good with that. I don't want to bet on unknown potential probably right away, depending on how they look in camp. We all know that there's always, a handful of players who just are ridiculous in camp. Paris Campbell comes to mind for like the last 2 camps, but they got to translate it to the field. So I'm okay with that. I could really see him coming out of it just because Ballard he's got to trust the player. He's got to trust that what you're supposed to do. And right now the other players haven't shown that, and Lewis definitely has.
Yes. And I think even if Tyquan Lewis is your starter, say, and then on third down, you bring in a Kamoko Toure or a Banagoo or whoever is your pass rush specialist. There's so much you can do. And the good thing with how deep this defensive end and really defensive line group is, you can play in waves. And that's what the Colts want to do, is they want to come at you in waves, right? They want to have a group of 4 and then another group of 4 to come and attack you. And the drop-off's not really that significant. And your offensive line is going to get exhausted if they continue to rotate fresh bodies in there. I think that's something the Colts are wanting to do. And I think now with how much they've, specifically the guys they've retained and the other guys they brought in, they have a really solid group from a depth standpoint.
Yeah, when you look at D-line for me, I feel like that's Ballard, D-line and O-line. And I know you guys covered the O-line last time, but they seem to be, that's his specialty. And he takes something from every Super Bowl that the Colts aren't in, and he sees what they need to add to be able to win. And then you look inside the division, and I think, obviously, as much as it pains everyone to say this, the Titans are the team of the division to beat. They've won it last year. They're the team to beat. And you're going to have a D-line that can be fresh, that you can rotate, because they're going to, they have Julio. Yeah, they have A.J. Brown. But, we talked about it on mine. You go with kind of the one who brought you, and they're going to pound you with Derrick Henry, and you got to be fresh. You got to be able to take that into the fourth quarter, especially if it's a close game. And you've got to be able to kind of rotate that in. And if these guys hit, or if they somewhat hit, or like you said, I do really like the idea of Kamoko coming in on third down and just Dwight Freeney-esque pin the ears back and just go, dude. Like don't worry about anything else. Just go get him. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I know I feel bad for him too, honestly, because I know he works hard. You see it all the time. He's there with Mathis all the time. He's at the academy with him, learning the pass rushing skills, and he's working hard. I think the injury 2 years ago was way worse than anybody ever thought. And he's not technically healthy right now. He didn't really get to participate much because he's still kind of coming back from the surgery to kind of correct it, which is scary. But no, I'm with you. I mean, the waves, like I love that. You're always fresh. And when you look at the teams that you have to beat to get where you want to go, you're going to have to be fresh on defense. You're going to have to handle the Derrick Henry. The Texans are without Deshaun Watson, presumably, and they're going to be running the ball. The Jaguars are going to be breaking in a brand new quarterback. They're going to look to run the ball. They've got a great running back there too. So you've got to be able to stay fresh and take that pounding and be okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then even the interior defensive line, we already know who the two starters are going to be. There's no question there of Buckner and Stewart. I would argue two of the best players at their position and what they do, they're right up there with the best in the league. And I think the biggest question mark right now is probably that backup three technique, right? Denico Autry played a little bit of that last year, but now you got to wonder, okay, who's going to be that backup three technique when DeForest Buckner goes down, or, obviously you hope that doesn't happen, but, when he needs a break or when something crazy happens and he's out, he's quarantined or whatever it is, you need to have insurance there for DeForest Buckner. Kind of similar. It's interesting. You talked about corner earlier, kind of what the Colts did a little bit when they signed TJ Carey a season ago, right? They got Kenny Moore insurance in a way. And obviously TJ Carey turned out to be a lot better than anybody anticipated, but you need insurance for when your starters go out, right? And the Colts have a few guys that I think can back up Grover Stewart very well, and Taylor Stallworth and Antoine Woods. We'll see. It'll be another interesting battle to see who wins out that spot. But the three technique backup is the biggest question mark for me right now. There's a lot of guys like that can play that three technique, but who can play it well, I think, is going to be the biggest question.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think you've got people who can plug in. They're not, I'm sorry. They're not Buckner. They're not Grover. There's a reason why they're not starting over those two. Buckner's an all-pro defensive tackle. Like he's probably, I think Zach said it on ours. If you did not have Aaron Donald, he would be considered the best defensive tackle in the NFL.
Yeah, hands down. Jones, man.
Yeah, no issue. None. He would be that. So you're not going to replace that. The interesting thing that I think is with going back to Dio with this is at Vanderbilt, living in Tennessee, I got to watch Dio play, and he moved all over the line between D end and D tackle. And I think that's an interesting thing, not for this year, obviously, because he's rehabbing, but is that something they're looking at? Do they look at where they're just he's going to be like, this is throwing it way back, but like Howie Long back in the day, the Raiders moved him everywhere on the line, wherever he was needed. That's where he could play. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting, God willing. It's different than last year that we don't sit down. The funniest thing for me is living in Tennessee, like I've said, is that Tennessee fans openly acknowledge that the main reason they won the second game was Buckner didn't play. That he didn't play. And so they recognize how good he is. Now he's caught a little bit of misquote heat from them because of the comment that he's excited to play against the Titans. And I think a lot of people took that as a shot to the Titans. It's more of he's excited about the talent that he's going to play against. But I mean, you hope it's kind of like if Jacoby were to come in at quarterback back in the day and he's got to play 4 games, you just kind of hope you go 2-2. You want someone who can plug in there. They're never going to be as good as Buckner is. You just hope they can keep it above water.
Yeah, and that's the biggest question. And obviously when Dio comes back, you presume if he's as good as everybody thinks he's going to be unquestionably that backup three technique, and then you'll feel a lot better about it. So it's kind of just getting by until he's healthy, right? And I think – But I think there's guys that are capable. I just don't know how great they'll be. I just don't know how high their ceiling will be at that 3 technique. Maybe a guy like Isaac Rochelle maybe fills that role a little bit. He's drawn a lot of comparisons to Danico Autry, right? A lot of people have said, looked at the stats and said, hey, I mean, before they came to Indianapolis, they had very similar stats. And so I don't know how much, weight you put into that, I guess, but it is interesting to think maybe he's the guy that can slide into that backup 3 technique and give you some solid minutes there. That would be interesting as well. But there's a lot of guys that can fill that role. It's just like who can fill it well. So it'll be interesting to see. But overall, man, this is a really, really interesting unit. There's a lot of potential, some unknown, but I mean, I feel like we think they're trending in the right direction right now, which is always good. Ballard definitely identified the biggest weakness on this defense and on this team, really. I mean, we had that debate so many times, and I know you guys did as well, like left tackle, defensive end, which one is more important? Obviously, Ballard felt like defensive end was so much more important because he drafted not 1 but 2 defensive ends in the first 2 rounds. Obviously, he figured out left tackle, but, I mean, it just goes to show that Ballard's the type of GM that he just wants to win so bad. He's not about the pride. He's not about cutting the 2nd-round pick or whatever. I mean, heck, he cut Zach Banner before training camp, right? He cut him before the season. The 4th-round pick. He didn't even give him a chance to see him in an NFL game. I mean, this guy's willing to admit his mistakes and move on, man. And I think you got to love that from a fan standpoint. Like, we all know he's not going to be perfect, but he's going to try his best to give the team the best edge to win.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be, like you said, I mean, I remember watching the draft, and it was kind of like this shock they double dipped on the 2 players. But it was like, man, I remember talking to Zach again right after it and going, man, he's got a plan for left tackle, obviously. He gets paid a lot of money, and he's really, really good. I've said it repeatedly, if not top 2, top 3 GM in the entire NFL, in my opinion. Yeah. But he's banking on it. And like you said, he found the weakness, and he's looking to improve it. He's doing everything he can to, because the defense itself was probably going out of last year was a pass rusher and maybe a corner. I mean, Xavier played really, really well, away from being an elite level defense. And you have all the pieces coming back. You've added some new ones. You have Eberflus at least for 1 more year. You got to kind of make this go. And what better way? I mean, it's kind of funny just because it's the complete opposite as a Colts fan of what you're used to seeing. You're not used to these dominant D lines and winning games because of the defense. But when Ballard came in, like, I still remember him saying that you guys are obsessed with these skill positions. I'm obsessed with the trenches. And he definitely proved it. He definitely proved it this offseason by just really hammering down. And I think one of the most interesting things, I mean, I hate to keep going back to Dio and Quiddy, but is the fact that there was a debate if Dio was healthy that he was going to get picked at 21. Yeah. And I can remember doing shows with you and talking with you, and a lot of stuff was, well, we would love Quiddy, but there's no way he's there. I mean, it would have been interesting if he hadn't been. Would they have pulled the trigger? And then you heard the rumors, obviously, too, that there was a team like right behind them ready to take Dio, so it wasn't this big reach. But, I mean, he knows what he's doing. He's loading up. He's big on take the most shots at the board you possibly can because something's going to stick. And God willing, it's Quiddy, and we get that second coming of Robert Mathis or Dwight Freeney and just take the defense to an otherworldly level. Yep.
And it starts with the defense, like with that line, man. That's what it starts with. That's how your defense goes from a pretty good defense to a great defense. If you can rush 4 and you can get home, man, that'll make all the difference in the world for everybody on your defense. The linebackers, the corners, the safeties, everybody will benefit if you can get to the quarterback. Yeah. All righty, that'll do it for this one, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Let us know your thoughts on this defensive line. A very interesting group. Let us know who you guys think potentially will be the guy to take that other defensive end position. Presumably, Kwity Paye takes the other one. But let us know in the comments below, guys. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you, Stephen, for coming on. And as always, guys, go Colts.